Okay, so yesterday in the Galatians, and I know I'm doing a lot of messages. I hope you're following the Galatians series. It's good stuff, because it's Galatians, not because it's me. But we talked about Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael being a type of the children of the flesh, Isaac being a type of the children of the promise or the children of the Spirit. And these are all illustrations, not of how to get saved, but how to live. You know, who are the true seed of Abraham? What does the faith of Abraham look like? And I skipped over a verse which needs a little more attention, which is verse 27. 26. The Jerusalem which is above is free, and that corresponds to the everlasting covenant and the gospel, the free gift of salvation, and that's the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travails not, for the desolate has many more children than she which has a husband. Now that's speaking of Sarah, but it's also speaking of grace, where there is a birth, right, without labor and without travail. Which that's referred to in Isaiah that as a picture of grace, that there's a birth, a nation born in a day with no travailing. Let's see if I can show that real quick. Isaiah 54. Sing, O barren, thou that did not bear. Break forth into singing and cry aloud. You did not travail with child, for there are more the children of the desolate than the others, right? Hold on. Then the children of the married wife. Enlarge the place of thy tents and let them stretch forth. That it's talking about Christ, and it's talking about the ultimate salvation and grace, okay? But Paul's using it to talk about the Christian life. That the principle is that we travail not. And he's talking about Christ being wrought into us. How is the Christian life produced? What is the Christian life? Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ in me. And he had already said, I'm laboring in you. I travail that Christ may be formed in you. He's laboring to get us out of labor. And the labor represents Hagar and Sinai and the struggle under the law and trying to perfect yourself in the flesh to produce an approximation of righteousness, which is just a caricature. It's not the real thing. But what God's going to do is actually manifest Christ without travail, without your struggle, without you groaning away to produce it and push and make it happen. It's an unexpected thing. That's the sense you get when you read it in Isaiah, is that it's an unexpected, shall a nation be born in a day? It's just like all of a sudden, where did these people come from? Where did this come from? And that's how our Christian life actually is in grace. As children of the promise who walk according to the Spirit, we are those who do nothing but believe on God's promise while repudiating all of our own efforts, which is what it means to be the true circumcision. We're not trying to help God. We've retired from making Ishmaels, and we're just waiting on God to visit us in the time of life, and we're not trying to make something happen. That's how the Christian life is lived. It is a life, in a sense, it's an effortless life of living Christ by faith in God's promise. And the pattern is Abraham. Let's look at Romans 4 real quick. Okay, hold on. For he against hope believed in hope. Here it is. Let me back up. As it is written, I've made thee the father of many nations, before him whom he believed, even God, who quickens the dead and calls those things which are not as though they are. Who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations, according to that which is spoken, so shall thy seed be. We know that seed is ultimately Christ. And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body, now dead, when he was about 100 years old, or the deadness of Sarah's womb. He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God. And what does that mean, that he's strong in faith? He was fully persuaded that what he was promised, he was able to perform, and therefore it was imputed to him as righteousness. What is the life of faith? It is hoping against hope. Once you realize that your body's dead and you're not going to be able to produce the fruit. Okay, that's what it really means to be the circumcised. Abraham, after his struggle with producing Ishmael and the household strife and all of that, came back to what he had when he was justified, which was just faith in God's promise. God visited him again and reminded him of his promise and said, you're going to bear a seed, but it's going to be through Sarah. And at that point, it was like, how? So he had to believe against hope. He hoped against hope. And he believed in him who calls those things that are not as though they are. God calls me righteous, even though I look at myself and I say I'm not righteous. He calls me holy. I look at myself and I say I'm not holy. He calls me fruitful and I feel barren. But I do not reckon on my feelings about my situation. I hope against hope. And I believe that God is the one who calls those things that are not as though they are. And why does he do that? Because he gives life to the dead. And when God visited them in the time of life, it was to bring forth the seed, which is Christ. And that's the same way he operates in our life. What is he wanting to do? He's wanting to bring forth Christ in our life, to manifest Christ. But it has to be in the time of life, and it has to be on his terms. And he waits for us to exhaust our Ishmael efforts. He really does. And eventually we become circumcised, which means I no longer trust in myself. You're not going to be fruitful if you're not circumcised. Circumcision is we do not have any confidence in the flesh. And unfortunately, when we get saved, we still have all kinds of confidence in what we can do for God. So did Abraham. Abraham was justified in Genesis 15 by faith in God's promise, but then spent the next 13 years trying to make it happen himself. But then he received the covenant of circumcision and was brought back to just waiting on God, who calls those things that are not as though they are, gives life to the dead. And that's how we live our Christian life. And that is those who are barren. We're pruned back. And it seems like we've got no fruit and we've got nothing other than a promise that we'll be fruitful and that Christ will be manifested in us. And that's our only hope. You know, I don't have a hope for righteousness apart from Christ being manifested in me. I don't have a hope for fruitfulness unless God, by his life, operates in me. And Jesus said, abide in me and I in you, for apart from me you can do nothing. The branch bears fruit because of the life of the vine in it. And I cannot make this happen by observation. But when it does happen, it's a surprise to everybody. When I start being fruitful, it's going to surprise everybody. Sarah and Abraham surprised everybody when Isaac came. Can you imagine? They're 100 years old. It was a surprise. And everyone who ends up being genuinely fruitful in the kingdom, I believe, their response should be surprise. There's a lot of people who are zealous workers for the kingdom that think that they're really fruitful, but they're not surprised because they expect it of themselves. But the children of the promise are surprised. You know, break forth, barren, you didn't travail. Remember what Jesus said to the disciples? The fields are white for harvest, and I send you to reap where you sowed not. Other men have sowed, and you are reaping from their labors. Others have sown. And that's what it is. We are here bearing fruit because somebody has sown the word into us and we believed it. And we went through all kinds of trials that brought us to an end of our natural strength. And we retired from our Ishmaels and gave up trying to help God. And then we were just settled down into a restful hope. Well, if God doesn't do it, it's not going to happen. And I'm done trying. It's sort of like giving up, But then God's able to start manifesting something, which is Christ. So I just wanted to speak to that verse, that it speaks to the effortlessness, the lack of travail, And the reason Ishmael persecutes, or Hagar persecutes Sarah, is because Sarah's barren. And while it seems like Hagar is producing the fruit, raising the heir, it looks like she's winning the day. She's got a seed and I don't. And she's mocking me because I don't have anything. And that's when you're vulnerable for the wolves to descend on you. The children of the flesh persecute the children of the promise, while the children of promise are waiting for the promise to be manifested, and they seemingly have no fruit. But they believe the gospel, But then later, the bondwoman and her son are cast out of the house because they're not legitimate and they will not dwell with the heir. So he says, nevertheless, what says the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, and the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. We are the heirs, and we are the righteous. How do we know we have the legitimacy? Because we are baptized into Christ, who is the true seed. He's the one to whom all the promises were made, and he confirmed the covenant. And justification is by faith apart from works, and it's not by striving in the flesh to perfect ourselves by law keeping. It is by believing in the promise. We are children of the Spirit, children of the promise, as Isaac was. And yeah, our fruitfulness is a surprise to everyone when it finally comes, because we didn't travail. And look how hard those sons of those sons of Hagar work at their Christian life and travail. But they're bringing forth wind. They don't bring anything forth that remains, and then eventually they're cast out. But we don't travail, but believe on the promise. And that's what he's saying. That's literally what Paul is saying. Paul is saying that the way grace works in the Christian life to produce Christ and manifest his fruit, the fruit of his life in us, is not by effort, but by resting and believing in Jesus Christ and believing in God's promise and hoping against hope, even though we know we're dead. We reckon ourselves dead. I, through the law, again, died to the law that I might live unto God. I've been crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ in me. The life I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. How? Just like Abraham, who considered not his own body as though dead, or the barrenness of Sarah's womb, but hoped against hope and believed on him who calls those things that are not as though they are, and gives life to the dead, and was firmly persuaded that what God promised he was able to do. And he rested from all his efforts and waited on God. And eventually, Sarah brought forth a surprise. And that's our pattern. That's our life. Abraham didn't do much. When you read the accounts of these people in the Old Testament on the line of life, they didn't do much. They just sat around and waited. Is that okay? Can you be content to wait while all of your Ishmaelite brothers are zealously working for the kingdom, supposedly, and supposedly bringing all this fruit and mocking you and persecuting you and saying, barren who did not bear, you don't travail, you're cursed, you don't have anything. You say, no, I'm the legitimate one. I believe the promise. I know you're illegitimate because you don't believe the promise. You're under law. You're the son of the bondwoman. And, he's not telling us to hate and despise people, but we need to recognize our position. And anybody can become an heir. All they have to do is believe and cease from their works. And wait on Christ with us, All right, take care.